Hey, this is Stephanie Shea, and you're listening to Gundam at MAHQ.
Who shot you in the ass?
Who? That who would be you.
Me? I shot you?
Yeah.
I mean, I was shooting. I did a lot of shooting. I mean, but I ain't saying I shot you in the ass. I mean, I ain't saying I didn't shoot you. But damn! Somebody shot you in the ass.
Tell me about it.
All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Neo, and welcome to Gundam at MAHQ. And joining me always is the Soul Bro and the Chris. Guys, say hello.
Hello.
Hello. And this is episode 308 of Gundam at MAHQ. And yep. You've seen it in the notes. Yes, we have them. We've kidnapped them. And we talked to Mark a long time ago. We were talking about this right before the show. It's around 2008 was the last time we spoke. But yeah, I mean, he knows a little bit about Gundam, so I'm sure we'll be able to get some things out of him. I don't know if he knows everything, but we'll see what he has. So joining us is pretty much the guru, the inspiration to us, Mark Simmons. Mark, welcome.
Oh, hey everybody, good to be here. Nice to chat with you all again after all these decades.
Really dating ourselves here.
Yeah. It's been a while. Funny how time flies when you're having fun. But yeah, so we're gonna just in this episode, it's gonna be one topic. We're just gonna be sitting around talking with Mark, talking about Gundam, and probably some things about the new projects coming, any other things that are kind of happening in the franchise there. So unfortunately, just like what happened in last episode where we had our friends from Mechanista join us, we're just going to forego the listener submitted news. That next episode is probably going to be I think we might just do a whole news episode.
I don't think we'll have time next episode because that'll be 1985 with Pedro. So.
Oh my God! It's just people. Yeah, we'll have to do a catch up.
One guess after another. Yep.
Didn't we do that years ago? Wasn't there a couple episodes where we had to do like just news catch ups?
Yes, we did.
So hopefully Mark will give us a lot of Gundam news, so he could just be like, "Hey, we talked about this." So, but so yeah, sorry about that, but I still encourage people to submit, so I will eventually get it to it. But yeah, so that's what it is. We're gonna sit down and have a chat with Mark, and I guess Chris, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I'm sure many of our very long-time listeners will be very familiar with Mark's work going all the way back to it's like the Gundam Project or Bandai Entertainment's old Gundam official website and its forums, or more recently Gundam Unofficial on UltimateMark.com. You've probably seen Mark's name in many credits on Gundam Productions on the English versions. So to kind of set it all off and get like a context, tell us, Mark, what and when was your first encounter with the Gundam franchise, and what was it that drew you in after that first encounter? What really spoke to you and set you on this path of decades of devotion at the altar of Gundam?
Oh, okay. So we're really traveling back in time, which is,
Yes.
it's always easier for me to sit here and wax nostalgic than to kind of have to tiptoe around talking about future stuff. So I'm glad we're traveling back in time before all the listeners were born. I think the kind of probably a mid '80s kind of thing. I was involved with kind of local San Francisco Bay Area anime fandom. I guess like first half of the '80s, if you can conceive of such a time. That was back when it was still all, you're trading tapes or discovering Star Blazers and going, hey, what's this crazy show? Is there anybody else in the world who's also watching this? Because we gotta compare notes on this. This is nuts. One of the things we had in my area, it's a sort of Silicon Valley area, half an hour south of San Francisco, is there was a hobby store called the San Antonio Hobby Shop. And it was about a mile from my parents' house. And they carried a lot of import models and books and so on. And it became sort of a watering hole for anime nerds, to the extent that that was even a thing back then. So, you could pick up import kits and they would stock related books and so on, kind of Roman albums and Bandai modeling materials. So I was kind of peripherally aware that Gundam was a thing that existed. But I think very specifically the thing that hooked me is I was really fascinated with Elgheim and Mori Nagano doing all the character designs and mecha designs and so on. And when I saw a kind of, was that Bandai published a MJ Material collection with some of the early Zeta Gundam stuff. I picked that up at the hobby store. It's like, oh, this is like Elgheim. Cool, there's more stuff like that. And so I bought it and I would pore over it and study it and kind of become fixated on it. And that kind of drew me into the whole world of Gundam nerdery, I suppose. So blame Nagano. The guys. And, from then on, it's just, like any burgeoning addiction, you kind of find yourself going to weird places and meeting skeevy people who know a guy who can hook you up with something else. And before you know it, you're kind of like hanging out in opium dens, like passed out on the couch. I kind of just went from there. And then
yes, the olden days.
Yeah, it was all very unwholesome. Not the sort of thing you should really let unsupervised teenagers get into.
It is funny though. I think a lot of us, that's back in those times, that a lot of it was at a hobby shop, or for myself it was a comic book shop, seeing models and figurines and just being like, whoa, what is this? So
so that's a limit as to how much one can really sneer at, oh, it's just a scheme to sell toys. It's like, yeah, and it worked. They sold me those toys, and that's why I'm here. You can't really be serious about that sort of thing. On some level, it is about the merch.
Yeah.
Good merch. I think we shouldn't be ashamed of that.
I don't want to think about how much money I've spent buying all of Gundam on DVD and then once again on Blu-ray. So,
how many formats have you bought it on?
Exactly.
I swear to God, I think
need to add that up.
I bought the movie trilogy 3 different times.
I know last time we spoke with Mark, DVDs were in vogue, and streaming services hadn't even, they were in their infancy. I remember Netflix just rolling onto Xbox Live in 2008. So, and they didn't really have that much of an anime selection. I didn't even think that we'd be able to stream anime same day in that time period, at that time. But I do miss the DVD age, though, especially since, you just committed to a show even before even seeing it. But I think I miss even more, even though it wasn't convenient at all, the era that you're talking about, Mark, where you traded tapes with people and didn't know what was on the tape, and then discovered new shows because of that. For me, I was 8 in 1985 when I saw Robotech for the first time, and I think I was in 1990 was the first time I swapped tapes with someone for anything, and I think the first time I saw Gundam in any form was Gundam 0083 through a tape swap in high school. I just got like the first 4 episodes, and it's like, what is this? I just got thrown into Gundam, not knowing anything about its vast history up to that point. So yeah, I miss that roundabout way that we came into shows like that. I'm shocked though that L Game was your first was your first hit. Did you see any of Dunbine back then as well, or did you come across Dunbine at that time?
It's hard for me to recall. I think back at the time, the availability of TV episodes was really tenuous.
Yeah.
That was something where you would really be dependent on your friend of a friend kind of thing. We had in San Francisco and Japantown, you had access to things. You had bookstores and record stores, even video rental places. But the availability of TV shows was much sketchier back then. It's one of those kind of shocking revelations I constantly have to remind people of.
Yeah.
That even in Japan, you couldn't get the original First Gundam TV series on home video until the Laserdisc box came out in like 1998.
Oh, wow. So it shortly after that, we got it here on DVD.
You got it pretty much as soon as Japan did.
Yeah.
At one point, in the 90s, at one point, I actually kind of got hooked up with somebody, recorded the reruns off TV for me on VHS and like mailed them from Japan.
Wow.
And up until then, I'd never seen the TV series. So the availability of like books and things was much higher. So in a lot of cases, not only are you kind of the tape trading thing, the hearsay, but there's a surprising amount of these things that I was aware of from seeing them in print media. It was more accessible than the actual videos. So I had Dunbine books. I'd never seen Dunbine the show.
Wow.
I had Dunbine model kits.
Man. Yeah, merchandise.
Wasn't it the case?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
Wasn't it the case also at that time in Japan that a lot of these TV shows that had OVA releases like Votomes, Elgime, Galliant, etc., that all those compilation OVAs were in place of actually releasing the full shows on VHS?
Yeah, it was pretty much what you were offered as a substitute for having the entire show on home video as well. At least you got a highlights reel. They would do stunts, like they would release selected episodes on Laserdisc. I think there was a CAV format Laserdisc with like the last couple of episodes of Gundam or something. They would do these stunts of like individual episodes that you could get. But it's the same here in the West. I mean, I remember, say, a show like Farscape. For a while, they would put out these. I think it was actually ADV put these out, wasn't it?
I believe so.
So an anime. Yeah. Was that?
Yeah, I believe you're right. When it comes to Farscape, ADV was putting that out.
It was.
So you had DVDs of selected episodes. Not like a box set with every episode like you get now, but it's like, well, this has some of them.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, I remember this one really weird episode, and I taped it when they reran it. But I really wish I had included that on the DVD selection, and they just didn't. This notion that you can expect to have everything available to you is very much a 21st century mindset, I think.
Well, it was probably, too, a way to reduce the risk for the company. I mean, they probably knew that there was just like a finite amount of people that were going to buy this stuff. And, even back then, you're probably thinking, manufacturing laser discs and DVDs and stuff like that is probably much more costly than it was now. And, you're going to put something out. People didn't know any better, so you at least capture something, probably.
Yeah, and that was a big issue with anime licensing as well. I think more so with DVD, where you have like the multiple language tracks, but you start to get a real fear on the Japan side that if they release a US version of something, which includes the Japanese language track, at a lower price point than the fairly extortionate rates they charge for that stuff in Japan,
Yeah.
and the Japanese customers are just going to reverse import it from the US
Yeah.
to save money. So there's all this kind of so much fear, I think, among the industry, this hesitation to run a risk to kind of kill the goose that's laying all these golden eggs for you.
Yeah.
Well, you saw that once things went to streaming and stuff, you had so many things where you'd have the OVAs on something, and then it was like, oh, well, there's no license for the series, So it's just it, and then I guess it finally caught up with everything. But yeah, it was a much different time on that stuff, and I mean, I know people wax nostalgic about it, but I don't necessarily know if it's a better time, because it is pretty nice now to be able to see everything.
Now you can watch anything, literally the
Yeah,
same day that it airs in
yeah,
Japan. And I think
simultaneous sometimes.
the ubiquity of anime now is so different from when we were coming
Yeah,
up. I think a lot of people can't appreciate that back in those days, the tiny American anime industry was pretty much all about boobs and gore.
yeah,
Yes.
The ultra violent shows, the fan service
oh yeah,
shows with the edgy trailers like, these aren't your dad's cartoons, this is Japanimation and it's totally whack.
yeah,
And if you wanted anything that fell outside of those narrow parameters of boobs and gore, you were out of luck.
yeah.
You had to go to fan subs at your comic store or your hobby store or whatever, because what the industry was offering was just to a very narrow subset of fan.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. There's a whole generation of people that are still out there. It's like, what's your favorite anime? They're gonna be like Ninja Scroll,
Yeah,
stuff like
I
that.
even
I
after
mean,
all this time, I have never seen Mad Bull 34.
Oh
And
man.
I have seen manga's trailer for that 10,000 times, and I can vividly recall some naked guy with like grenades covering his junk. I don't know the context for that. I don't think I want to know the context for that, but that memory is seared in my brain and will stay with me for my entire life.
yeah,
Yeah. So I think one of the characteristics of that era of very patchy availability is that the weirdest things would make it through that filter, and you individually or you as a generational cohort would imprint on them out of all proportion to their kind of cultural relevance or industry significance or anything. That's the transmission that got through. That's the, you're flipping the radio dial and suddenly this one station and comes in really strong and there's a guy with grenades covering his junk and you're like, whoa! And it's just that aesthetic. It was the time.
So I'm curious, looking back, what did you like about Gundam when you first got into it, and how has that changed over the decades, but also what has stayed the same in terms of what about Gundam speaks to you?
Ooh, that's a good question. Thank you. Thank you for the good question. And let me blather for a minute while I organize my thoughts.
Sure.
It was initially the robots, and that was largely because of their resemblance to Nagano's stuff for Elgime, which was very beautiful as illustrations and as three-dimensional objects. And I think one of the things that's kept my attention on Gundam in particular, and the Tomino works and anime and so forth more generally over the years, is there's just a lot to it. There's a stage where I became really fascinated with the world building, and you're kind of learning about mythology and science and things like that, and you can go down that rabbit hole. And that's quite fun, and then eventually you kind of run into this wall where ultimately it's a slightly shoddily constructed fictional world, and at a certain point there just aren't coherent answers for a lot of these questions. And then you kind of start thinking about, well, the maybe the aesthetics and the artistry of what's being put on screen. Right now, it's the historical research, right? Who were the people making these things, and what were their working lives like, and what was their thought process in doing stuff? It turns out there's a ton of information about that that's kind of ancillary to the shows themselves. There's always something. There's been a lot to mine there. It's possible that anything you latch onto, maybe I could have applied that same mania to like Jerry Anderson TV shows, or the Jim Henson works, or jazz music like Robert Crumb.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure there are any number of things that you could spend decades nerding out about. And I think at a certain point, to be perfectly honest, I'd invested so much time on this, and I'd put so much of that stuff out there that I think, well, maybe this is a particular weird obsession that I'm here to keep feeding. That at a certain point you go, I can put something out there that will be valuable for other people to appreciate this specific thing. I'm not in a position to deepen the world's appreciation of jazz music or the Jim Henson corpus, but I'm in a position to maybe enrich people's experience when they happen to bump into this particular weird 1970s robot show. And fine, let's just do some more of that.
I can definitely, appreciate that, looking at the calendar, and we're creeping up on the 25th anniversary of MAHQ. And, even 25 years ago, the availability of Gundam was
Oh my gosh.
so different than it is today. And, when I started the site, my foundational principle was, I don't want to talk about the things that are already super popular and known, like Evangelion. I want to bring people's attention to obscure things and share my interests with those people. And obviously Gundam is very big now, doesn't need any help from people like me, but I've put so much time into it that's almost like I can't let it go.
Yeah,
So-
and maybe... Oh, go on.
No, go ahead, because I got a different question. So
Okay. But maybe it doesn't have to be a lot deeper than that. I think it's possible to extract meaning and interest from any number of things on this world, both things that humans have made and things that nature has furnished us with. And if you've got something where you're kind of borrowed in like an informational tick, then go with it. Carry on.
Good question.
So, Mark, I have a quick question for you. And I know this is going to be a difficult one. But why do you think that Gundam has endured so much and through so many different iterations? And, it seems like in some ways it's almost going stronger now than it ever has. And even with younger audiences. And, I mean, you're always going to have the old hats, but... it just seems, especially the last couple of releases that we had, which were Mercury and things like that, that it was just causing such a stir. And I mean, what is it? I mean, I know that I think beyond just the big cool robots, is because there's got to be something more than that. Sorry. I know it's a tough one because I've been trying to think about myself too. So,
I mean, the big cool robots are a thing. The fact that it's tied to this model kit product line is a powerful thing. This seems like a weak cop-out answer, but it's the first thing that I'm kind of clutching at here. I think at this point, Gundam has just become a very identifiable kind of brand. As a character, as an experience, as an aesthetic, you kind of know what you're going to get. When you think about other things that have survived over the years, through various ups and downs and hiatuses and bombs and so on, and struggled and got back on their feet. I'm sure you can think of a lot of things like that in popular culture. I think the fact that you have a pretty good idea as to what Gundam is going to be about is reassuring. So even if you're a kid and you're tired of hearing your parents and grandparents like witter on about this like stupid 70s robot show, they've made one for you that's new and kind of standalone, but still is going to deliver the Gundam experience in a recognizable way. So as an industrial band called the KMFDM, pride themselves on the number. I think changes over the years, but let's say we've had like however many 20, 30, 40 years of conceptual continuity, and I think it's like that. They've stumbled towards some kind of coherent thingness of Gundam. And when you look back at there were points in time where that wasn't clear how that was going to play out. When they did G Gundam around the 15th anniversary, which is now, this is a 30-year-old show, which is insane. But 30 years ago, you had this kind of crisis point where it's like, we can't, if we just keep going in the direction we're going, this thing's going to run to the ground. Kids won't watch it. The thing's going to die on the vine. We'll get left behind. And so as a company, Sunrise and Bandai, which had just bought them out, took a gamble that they could pitch almost everything about Gundam except for the name and the recognizable brand identity, and kind of maintain something that you look at and go, that's still Gundam, even though it's insane and has nothing to do with Gundam. So the fact they went through this basically a 5-year stretch of really just flailing about, trying to figure out what even was Gundam, and came out the other side with a consensus where everybody in the world now goes, yep, that's a Gundam kind of Gundam thing. It's Gundaming, all right. I think that 5-year span between 1995 and 2000 was probably pretty crucial in making this something that would last half a century.
Yeah. Yeah, you do bring up a great point. It's like G Gundam is like the least Gundam show there is, like, because in a lot of ways it's so much different than everything else, and it's even if you distill like the core essence of what Gundam is with a lot of the stories, the ostracized person, the thing, the feeling of like, not belonging, the stolen Gundam, all these, the political intrigue, and things like that. And you kind of don't necessarily have that in G Gundam, but in a lot of ways it seems to be one of the most least Gundam shows there is. So, because it's much different than anything else. I will still say of all of them, it just seems it's so different, but yet it feels so Gundam.
Yeah,
it's definitely a Hail Mary.
It's almost
show,
like,
and
I was just saying, it's like, just like, I think because it's just I think it's more of a celebration of the robot more than anything. I think that's where it's really, the Gundam is always the star of the shows, but I think in those it's like really the star of the show. So, in so many different versions of it. So
yeah, and you can come up with some generalizations about the nature of Gundam stories, where you might say, oh, it's about young people kind of growing and challenging themselves in battle and kind of discovering, and charting a new future for the humanity. It's like, yeah, but you can say about a lot of stuff. You can say that about Macross. It's not ultimately what makes Gundam distinctive is just that it's very recognizably Gundam. It's so circular, but that's my best answer.
it's kind of like become a genre unto itself, because whatever else is going on in the mecha genre as a whole over time, with its ups and downs and changes in what's popular and what's not, Gundam's just kind of off to the side doing its own thing, kind of apart from all of that, which kind of, in some respects I feel like it's something that sort of exists out of time, in the way that like American comic books, all of these characters like Batman, Spider-Man, whoever, they all exist in an ever-shifting eternal present. And there's always some Gundam story to be told of a conflict between Earth and space, some maladjusted teenagers. Like, you're just remixing all these elements, and even though, you know, until now with G Quux, like, they're not remixing literally the same characters. We've had so many people who are stand-ins for Amuro and Char and for the 1 Year War as a whole, that it's kind of that same ending present. And I don't know what the future holds for Gundam in that respect, but I think it's just going to keep kind of being its own thing, even chasing in different directions with new audiences like Witch from Mercury, and I guess we'll see now with the new series. But my next question for you, Mark, was how and when did you make the jump from being a fan to working on the professional side, and what was your first project?
I guess I'd been I'd been involved in fan stuff in the late 80s through the 90s, being involved in fan publications like Animag, and then being adjacent to the Animerica crowd, so I would do some work for them occasionally. I got that's unkind. Key 3 entrusted the Gundam Project website to me. It was very kind of him. And so I took over the custody of that. And at a certain point, really what it was is when Gundam Wing became a hit, and I think Bandai was kind of scrambling to organize some kind of commercial presence in America to capitalize on it. And so they had this whole slate of initiatives and things that they were doing. They were doing websites. They were doing this kind of subscription-based direct sales VHS products. They were doing model kits and toys. And they approached me, I guess, because I was like the first. I don't know if it was just I was the first name that came up in the fan Rolodex or what, but hey, this guy seems to be able to present a convincing front of knowing some stuff about Gundam. Let's bring him in to do some copywriting and website text and whatever else needs doing. So it was really that. It was that I kind of got roped into this whole push to commercialize the Gundam thing in the US. And I was working initially for the US side. And then eventually I didn't really have much of a consulting role on things like Gundam Wing or the Anime Village releases, if anybody remembers that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the first time I was really brought in to consult on things like scripts and so on was with First Gundam. That'd be around kind of the turn of the century. Nowadays, a lot of the stuff I do is for the Japan side, instead of or in addition to the adaptation side. But also that's partly because the Japan side now is much more hands-on about what happens with the adaptation. So the point in time where I think Japanese companies generally, they would as long as the check cleared, they give you the assets and they didn't care what you did with them. And now I think both the original creators, in the case of things that are based on manga properties, or the studios, or any number of other people on the Japan side, are much more handsy.
There was a lot of freewheeling going on back in the 90s and in the aughts, but correct me if I'm wrong, but if memory serves, at least when it came to Gundam in the Bandai Entertainment days, my impression was that Sunrise was more hands-on when it came to the domestic releases of any Tamino series, and sort of less so with any Gundam projects that were not his. Is that a correct recollection?
I think that's fair. I think, especially with First Gundam, which really is the crown jewel of Sunrise. So I think they were inclined to be to keep a close eye on that. But that's partly because they did a dub of the Gundam movies, which took a really stunning number of creative liberties with the material.
Like all the Star Trek technology.
Yeah, beam starboard, that whole kind of thing. It wasn't good. I think there was an element of trust there, and then they felt, well, we can't trust you guys to handle this material without our supervision. So, this is all kind of 25 years ago now, but I think there was a time in the late 20th century when Japanese licenses were perfectly happy to let the Americans American things and do the American stuff in America. And then nowadays, they're much more, it's much more supervision. And I think around the turn of the century is probably when that leash started getting shorter. So it's not a bad thing to have to be kind of on tap as a consultant for the Japan side, because then I get to stick my thumbs into stuff where to wet my beak, as they say.
And I'm always keeping out my eye for all sorts of details when I watch anime, especially Gundam. I pay attention to, any kind of English text on computer screens, and it's like, did they just put some gobbledygook there, or did they put some thought into this, or what? How are they spelling these words? And I'm such a nerd in that respect.
It's project by project. I mean, sometimes the most trivial on-screen bits of text they'll want to get translated. I think in the first Hathaway movie, there's this book on botany that Hathaway is reading at one point.
Oh, yes.
And you got it for a fraction of a second, and they actually sent me this giant wall of text, like, please translate this. So I translated that, whole intro pages on that botany book. And then there are some shows, like, I think with Iron-Blooded Orphans, I wasn't actually involved in the script translation on that at all. But it would have me kind of work on the spelling lists for everything, and things like episode titles, and occasionally they would have me translate bits of on-screen text. So it's project by project. Sometimes I touch stuff, sometimes I don't. Sometimes things show up on screen, and I don't know where it. I didn't see it. I think with G-Quarks actually, I wasn't involved in the terminology lists for that I can recall. And I wasn't involved in the on-screen text, but it seems like it came out all right anyway. So they don't need me. They don't always need me. And then won't go down the tubes the moment I'm not there to look after it. I feel so
Oh, damn.
useless. Other people in the world can do this.
Damn them. I do have a quick question going back to what you had mentioned about jazz in general. I love jazz. It's one of my favorite genres of music. You might have to think about this, but who are your favorite jazz artists?
I was just using that as an example of a nerdy obsession, specifically because I know nothing about it.
Oh, fix my face.
I thought this was going to be a Thunderbolt question.
Oh my
That's
goodness.
where I thought this was going.
Oh, now it's just a fake out. I was using that as an example.
No, you're good. You're good.
About jazz.
No, it's all right. I thought you were hinting that you are a jazz aficionado, or at least a fan of the genre. So no, it's cool. It's cool. It's absolutely cool.
Secret transition from me to Ryu.
Yes. Well, I think I could guess this one, but what's your favorite era of mecha designs? Is it the Super 70s or the 80s or the streamlined 90s?
These are good questions. Partly because these are things which I haven't thought about in a few years, and so I've completely changed my mind in the interim. Initially I was kind of an 80s kind of guy.
I'm still stuck there.
Yeah. And then, I went through a Katoki phase, as one does. I think Nagano is my aesthetic first love.
Oh yeah.
Then the course researching all this 70s Soatia, early Sunrise stuff, I've got a whole new depth of appreciation for Okawara and all that classic Super Robot stuff. I'm like, it is part of that is. that at first my experience of this stuff came from seeing, the toys, the model kits, the books, the model sheets, things like that, and seeing what they do in the show is, on screen is very secondary. I didn't have access to a lot of that stuff. Now thinking about this in terms of the impact they make as on-screen characters rather than as products, I think I definitely appreciate how good Okawara stuff looks on screen.
Yeah. I think he has a fine balance between what's in animation and what can actually be rendered into actual merchandise, models or actual toys. Chris, I believe you brought it up last episode that Okawara makes paper mache models of the mecha he designs before he actually commits to their design. Basically, he wants to make sure they can be physically realized. So maybe that's part of his genius.
He's a very three-dimensional guy. I've seen video of him doing interviews in his workshop, and it's pretty high tech.
Wow.
I'll say he used to do a lot of wooden models. I think he stopped doing that in the 90s because increasingly the people he was dealing with at the toy companies had enough familiarity with the material they could work that out themselves.
Yeah.
It was basically that he was doing that to present the things in a way that people at the toy companies could understand how they could be made. And then once they'd approved it, it would be translated into animation. I think his stuff has a lot of character. It has, as I say, a striking silhouette.
Mm-hmm.
It looks fantastic on screen. You look at something like, Gal Geiger, which is the best robot show ever made.
Yes.
Oh my god. Yeah.
That's so good.
There's so much character. When you're looking at stuff as a model kit or a toy or as a model sheet, you might be distracted by little greeblies and widgets and filigrees and, oh, look at this little kind of, this thing here, it's got the vents and then it kind of flares out, and it's but it doesn't have the same kind of presence. So yeah, my taste has regressed.
Yes.
It's like Altered
Gal
State.
Geiger is one of those few super robot shows where the stock footage of the combination sequence, I never skip it because it just looks so damn good and it's so well animated. Like, how could you not watch this each and every single episode?
I never got sick of it.
There's a whole line there we could get into about the role of things like the transformation sequence. In all my various researches and various things, one of, I think, the most profound and interesting observations I've seen anybody make about mecha design was Makoto Kobayashi talking about Double Zeta.
Oh.
And saying that there was a point in time when the products, the toys, the models, were sufficiently crude and unarticulated, they couldn't reproduce the movements of the robots on the screen. But the transforming and combining they could do. So that's the point at which the toy you're holding in your hands, if we're talking like classic 20th century product plans, the younger the age group, the more expensive the toy because your grandparents are buying them for you.
Yeah.
So you have your deluxe, 10,000 yen combining set, and you can hold in your hands and you can follow along. You are enacting, you are communing with the machine in that moment. During the moment of transformation, that's where the world of the on-screen and the thing you hold in your hands become one.
Yes.
They're in sync, and you're in the show. During the transformation, it's almost like a communion. It's like mass.
I totally get that. I've been salivating at some of the soul of Shogoken. I think that's how you say it. Models that have been, not models, but toys that have been released recently. I know they did one for Gal Geiger, and I believe they recently did one. It's for something I can't remember, but the Gal Geiger one was so impressive and huge, and it's like I wish I owned that because it's so incredible. I think they did one for Combatler V too. I'm actually getting back into that era of mecha anime design as well. I think they call it the Gata era. So you Combatler V, Get a Robo, Go Lion, and the like.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a cool era of mecha anime that I think is just unappreciated, to be honest.
then conversely, the movement,
Mm-hmm.
when you're looking at kind of your 70s and 80s mecha anime, the stuff the robots are doing on screen is something that, never mind the toys and the models, even according to model sheets, they can't reproduce it. I think it's not until you get to like maybe G Gundam or Gundam Wing
Mm-hmm.
that the lead Gundam even is designed with a rotating waist joint.
Oh, wow.
Every previous Gundam, if you look at the way it's designed in the model sheets, it's physically impossible for the waist to rotate.
Right.
So all those flamboyant heroic movements that you see them making are cheats. The gulf between what the robot does on screen and what a product that you hold in your hands could possibly replicate used to be so vast it was unbridgeable. The revolutionary thing with Bandai's Gundam model kits, at least they looked like the model sheets. They couldn't move like they did on screen, but they would look like the model sheets at least. Now you have this thing where the emphasis is less on kind of reproducing transformations and combinations and more on reproducing the movements. Especially with CG, where it's like we can just build a model that looks like the model that is the model, and the model does the model thing, and they all do the same thing, so you can actually pose along with what you see on screen. But that means that both the products have gotten more, they have more character, and the things you see on screen have less because you're not allowed to cheat them anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think my final observation on this, so before we move on to some other topic,
Mm-hmm.
is that was one of the things that was really striking to me when I was looking at the footage from G-Quux, is even though the Gundam in that looks like it's sort of been through a transporter accident with an Evangelion, all the poses it's striking are poses from the original series.
Mm-hmm.
Doing things that the original Gundam did in the same way it did them, but you see how radically the robots had to be redesigned in order to make that physically possible.
Yeah. It's which makes sense because we're getting it's a revisit back to that era. It's just got a new coat of paint, a remix, if you will, of the original Mobile Suit Gundam in some ways. So I'm excited for that for GQX. I didn't expect it until the second trailer hit and it showed us that they're going to be treading on old territory. So I just excited to see how it's going to be different.
Soulbro,
Mhm.
think at this point we should turn it over to the audience, and
Yeah.
maybe you want to read some of the questions. We got some in the YouTube chat. I think we also had some on the MAHQ Facebook group.
We did, and matter of fact, I'll start off with that one. This one's from Peter Wong over on Facebook. He asks, "Why did?" And you may not know the answer to this, and if you don't, that's fine. But he wants to know, why did Hathaway's Flash Part 2 anime take so long to finally go into production after 4 years after the first movie was released? I know just from the news I've been seeing that the anime industry in Japan is understaffed crazily right now. But do you have any insight on that at all?
If I knew, I wouldn't tell you, but I don't know, so I can speculate. Honestly, I think it's probably, I would assume that it may just be a matter of capacity. This again is something where during my current voyages into the deep, deep past of the 1970s, you're constantly hitting these situations where Sunrise just runs out of capacity.
Mm-hmm.
In 1979, all of a sudden they're producing 5 shows simultaneously, and they basically have to they got to rent a whole bunch of new studio spaces and hire on a whole bunch of new people who've never animated before, get them up to speed so they can start churning the stuff out.
Yeah.
So I think it probably does have a lot to do with this capacity, personnel constraints. You can't do everything all the time, all at once. And right now they've got a lot of Gundam on the boil. There's a lot of Gundam happening all the time. And it may simply be, that the people who they wanted to do the next Hathaway movie got roped into some other project. If you look at, the credits on that, who are the key animators, who are the production assistants, who are the animation directors and the unit directors, what have they been doing lately? I wouldn't be surprised, not having checked it out, if they just got roped into some other project in the meantime.
Yeah,
So they got to make a living too.
absolutely.
So that's my That's my uninformed speculation.
Hey, it's good to answer as any. And thank you very much, Peter Wong, for your question. Next is a question from MCT Dread. And they ask, what are some characters, story elements, etc., that were cut from the final product you still find fascinating and interesting through Gundam's history? So this is a broad question. Answer it however you'd like. But yeah, what are the character, story elements, etc., that were cut from the final product that you still find fascinating or interesting through Gundam's history?
Ooh, I feel I should have some stuff ready to go on this. I mean, it's always interesting when you have a project that just gets cancelled outright.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the show that Imagawa was going to do, the Gundam show he was going to do before they made him do G Gundam instead.
Oh.
Yeah, this is something where it's been mentioned in a handful of places over the years.
Mm-hmm.
That basically that I think after Tomino handed over the reins to Imagawa, the project that was being developed as a new show to follow on from V Gundam was something that Imagawa called Polka Gundam.
Oh.
Because he had apparently what it was is he had this notion that it was an Italian neo-realist movie called the Railwayman, I think. And, and he remembered that the main character in that was named Polkarino. He's like, it's kind of like what I have in mind for this story, so I'll name it after him. And then he went back and checked, and that wasn't the name of the character at all. So he no longer remembers where he got the name. It was going to be this story. It's going to be set on Mars. They had this whole kind of like stable of creators lined up to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Izubuchi was going to be working on it. Shoji Kawamori was involved in some capacity. Some of the design work Kawamori did for this ended up getting used for Cowboy Bebop for the Mars colonies there.
Oh, wow.
So there was this whole phantom project. And then basically a couple months before it's meant to be airing, they call Imagawa into Bandai headquarters and go, no, we're doing Street Fighter.
Yes!
And you do that because you work for these guys. And so that just all went away. And you're like, but. So there are things like that where there are entire shows that were kind of lumbering through the pipeline and got to the point of generating some tantalizing development art. I think probably the biggest what if for me, though, as a total Nagano fanboy, is every time I see his rejected designs for stuff, his vision for Double Zeta, his designs for Star's Counterattack.
Mm-hmm.
I could have changed history. The entire look of Gundam would have gone in a totally different direction.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, it would have.
And that's, if we're thinking about kind of historical branches, it could have, what if Nagano Double Zeta? What if Nagano Char's Counterattack? And I can't let go of that, man. That's the timeline I would want to take a peek at.
Yeah, I would be interested.
Even those shadowy glimpses of the Zeta in the first opening of Zeta that don't match what we end up seeing in the show.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. So there's all these kind of weird aesthetic directions where it's like, would it have made the story different if they'd done that? Oh, and the one other thing, speaking of phantom projects, is I hit at one point I was going through and translating like random snippets of this new type interview where Tomino was mentioning that as he's like developing Char's Counterattack, what became Char's Counterattack, he's also thinking about a continuation of Double Zeta with the further adventures of Judo Ashita.
Ooh. On Jupiter.
So at that point, he had this naive idea that I can do a movie and a TV series simultaneously because I'm Tomino. And it's like, no, he couldn't, and he didn't. But I would have loved to see, like, Triple Zeta, whatever it would have been. What would happen to those characters? Because he so seldom returns to his characters, so you can check in on them later. Normally they just get discarded. Like somewhere, somewhere Job John and on a little lying by the side of the highway. Somewhere like, Fa and Camille are out there living their life. Sailor Mouse, as I know, she's like trading stocks or something. Who knows what happens to characters? You never go back and see them. You assume they live on doing something.
Yeah, one would.
That would be one I'd want to see. The limited the limited series of Joe John.
Hell yeah,
You
man.
know,
And
life
Samolo.
after the military.
You
Or
can go read Fastest Formula, where he is an old man and he's in the Formula era as a mobile suit executive.
Or maybe that kind of figures actually.
Look, man.
That kind of tracks there. I kind of see him as that way. Or the chef that needed salt. Maybe he has like a salt-based
Bro,
Michelin star restaurant.
we don't get enough
That's his
salt.
name.
I mean,
I want more of the culinary adventures of the White Bay Chef. That's
yeah.
that's what I've been waiting on.
I mean-
Shout out to Yazi.
I mean, like he has just a salt-based restaurant. Like that's his
Salt
whole
Bay?
thing. You know, his whole thing is when I was in the 1-year war, I made sure that everybody had enough salt. I actually had us do a detour once to get salt.
Hell yeah.
At great peril for the entire white base, but we had to get it.
It was needed.
This
Oh my god.
suggests another possible question, which is, where we just sit around and jawbone about our absolute favorite, like, most utterly minor Gundam characters. We'll have to wait for somebody to actually ask that in the live stream.
Oh,
so
yeah.
let's move on.
Oh, no problem. MCT Dread also asks, what is your favorite mecha anime OP and ED?
Or what? Gundam?
Well, that is, again,
Or just in general?
you're going to get a different answer depending on the day of the week.
Mhm.
Right now, it's like, aside from Gao Geiger, which is the greatest robot show ever.
That's
Oh, yeah.
what I was going to say. I go on
So-
YouTube periodically to watch that.
Yes.
I own the show. But I will go periodically. Like if I'm kind of feeling like just a little down, I will sit there and I will go to YouTube and to just prop up Gal Gaigar because I don't know what it is. It is a show that automatically puts about 50,000 grams of sugar directly into your bloodstream and with a shock to your heart because it's just there. I mean. I'm at one point, I'm yelling, "Dividing driver!" It's a sing-along. I mean, it's great. Yeah.
I remember at one point trying to chip ice out of the freezer of our refrigerator with a screwdriver. And then I hit a Freon tube.
Yes.
That replaced the entire fridge. I haven't done impressions grown up watch TV shows like Gal Geiger.
Oh.
Anyway, but otherwise, I love all those like Mio openings or your Combine and so.
Yeah, I adore Mio. The work she did from L Game to Dunvine to Zeta, man, I just it's especially Hey You from Zabungle. I have a soft spot for that song, but for me it's Mizo was it To the Aqueous Star with Love, season 2 of Zeta Gundam. I think it's the greatest OP in all of mecha anime. I love that song so much.
I thought you loved Century Color.
Oh, fuck you.
So, bro, that opening doesn't exist.
Gross.
We just have instrumental music in
Yeah,
America
right.
because that song never happened.
Oh man, I actually would love to hear the original take of the song, which was never recorded. What is it? I forget what it is, but Neil Sedaka had intended the song to be for his daughter to sing, but they never got around to doing it, and they just made it the opening for season 2 of Zeta Gundam. But yeah, that song does it for me every time. It's I never skip it. And and season 2 of Double Zeta as well with Silent Voice is fantastic too. So those are my.
Why are you stealing those words out of my mouth?
Oh, I'm so sorry. By all means, go for yours.
It's Silent Voice, like, Double Zeta has its merits and I do enjoy it. It is definitely not my favorite Gundam show, but Silent Voice has always been my favorite openings. Just the song, the anime, it's just such a well done opening, and it's such a contrast from Anime Janai. Like you couldn't get any farther from that than Silent Voice, but it works.
Hey, I mean, Double Zeta's got the greatest one of the greatest transformation musics. That drum music that they go for the Double Zeta. I mean, that thing gets me all the time. Yes. I mean, I will say, of Gundam stock footage, I don't get sick of that one. I don't get, I get sick of the, the judo thumbs up and, all the levers and buttons they're pushing to get this thing to go.
Oh, a special award goes to the opening for Votoms, by the way. That's another one that's fantastic. But any other thoughts on that, Mark? Any EDs or any other opening themes that you're akin to?
Got a couple more I want to mention while we're thinking about it.
By all means.
After all these decades, the two openings for August 2 still stick with me. They were just bonkers.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going outside the realm of mecha anime, I'd also say the opening and ending for Satoshi Kon's Paranoia Agent are just wonderful.
Oh yeah,
I love the music artist phenomenally.
Yeah.
He did great work on Berserk as well, and Detonator Organ as well. It's great themes all around. A special. I think the greatest mecha theme of all time, though, is you get the burning from Nadesco. Though that to me, it fires me up so much. It's one of the best themes ever. I love
over
that.
Gal Gaga.
Over Gal Gaga, I'll put that against anything. It's
Oh my!
my favorite. I think it might be my favorite anime opening of all time, to be honest.
Ooh, wow.
So no love for the G Gundam openings.
Oh, I'm great with those, but I just think it's a losing battle because you get the burning, man. That's just, especially when you get to the bridge. Oh my god, it tears me up every time. It's fantastic.
As far as endings, I got
Mark,
two.
I think you've realized that Soul Bro most of the time is wrong. So
Oh no! We're not doing that this episode.
No,
I say you can't argue taste.
Yes.
De gustibus non disputandum. Otherwise, I also want to mention, what was it? Winners Forever from V Gundam.
Oh, that's
Definitely,
great.
I like it much more than
That's
the
a good
opening.
one.
And since I did recently watch Zambot, the ending song from that one, it's just
it is good.
It's sweet, and the lyrics are just killer.
Yeah, man, it's fantastic.
Oh, we'll never, we see our home star up in the heavens. We'll never go back there again. We have our mother and father. And we have this, this peaceful and bountiful earth. So goodbye. It's like
After you just saw a bunch of blood and guts.
And they even that show.
Whew, that was a tough one too.
That's one of my Tamino holes that I still have not plugged in terms of his.
Neo and I we crushed to that when you were off the show for a little while. We did a review of Zambot 3 and yeah, those bombs put in the kids, man.
Oh my god!
Still keeps me up at night.
That bomb episode is I mean,
that's a toughie right there, man.
Jeez, I sometimes I still am like back and forth. I mean, I know Adeon is up there with that, especially with little kids getting their heads blown off with bazookas and stuff. But man, that bomb episode is just one. Like, what is this man doing? Like.
After that, this guy will do anything. He'll kill kids. He'll kill pets.
Exactly. Yeah, and then it's like if I had watched Zambot 3 before I saw Adeon, I think I would have been just completely desensitized to the little girl with the RPG to the noggins because it wasn't that shocking. And his nonchalantness of like how these people just get murked is just ridiculous.
It's a weird thing to have a reputation for, but
exactly.
He's happy Tamino, ever since Turn World, we're all about happy fun times and dancing ferrets and King Gainer opening, and it's all good vibes.
That's a great opening too. Oh my god.
Oh yeah,
King Gainer.
Whew. Really, we could stay with this for a while.
Yeah. Next question.
All right. Next up, and thank you, MCT Dread, for your submissions. Next up is Frank Lawson. And Frank Lawson says, and I'm not sure how far you can go into this, but I'm sure you've seen your fair share. He would like us to talk about the technical manuals, I guess, for the various anime series you've worked on, and the research that went into creating and translating them. Did you have to do that often in regards to the projects you worked on?
If we're talking technical manuals, I think you may be thinking of those ones that Tokyo Pop put out.
Yeah.
basically translated from the Dengeki data collections.
Ah.
I wasn't involved. I wasn't involved with those,
Mm-hmm.
but I have translated over time fair amount of kind of the Japanese reference material.
Ah.
Originally, it was just raw material for the content I was writing for Bandai, and then in a later iteration, I was just kind of translating those and posting them directly just to the universe. Um, so yeah, I think. Remind me, what was the exact question again?
It's just basically he wanted us to speak on, if we could, about technical manuals related to the whatever shows or projects you worked on, and the research that went into creating and translating them.
A lot of that is just accumulating the materials. I think for everything that I do, I'm definitely hitting the bookshelf, and I have quite a. I'm gesturing here. You can't see because this is radio.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of material around me in this little tiny home office. It's pretty much the walls are lined with these things. So a lot of this stuff ends up is propagated through weirdly through kit manuals. A lot of it through third-party publications. It's all you build up a library of this stuff. You kind of know after a while you know where to look things up. I don't. These days, I've kind of stopped doing the kind of translating the in-universe technical material. Partly because other people do a pretty good job of covering that stuff, and partly because where Gundam is concerned,
Mm-hmm.
it's been essentially frozen since about 1999 or so.
Oh,
There's
wow.
been very little new material developed about the Universal Century world since the Gundam Officials came out, which is about more than 25 years ago now, I think. Let me just grab that wretched book and just check the publication date.
You are far from the only person I know who is not a fan of Gundam Officials.
Yeah, that was, let's see. Okay, March 2001. So it's almost a 24-year-old book. But since that came out, pretty much everybody just copy pastes from that. There's been very little new explanatory material to translate. There's very little new to say about the backstory or the history or the mechanics of the UC world. And a lot of the alternate universe shows that have come out since then, often the backstory is fairly vaguely sketched in. The Mechanics in the World book series, I think it's that Futabasha puts those out. Those are pretty much the only places where you're going to get any kind of attempt to explain what's going on in any of the new Gundam shows. So there's just less to translate now. They've kind of, not to sound all snotty and dismissive, but I feel like on the Japan side, they've kind of given up on trying to keep track of what's going on in that world.
Oh, man.
It's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah. At a certain point, it's just they're just churning the same existing information and punching out and calling it a day. There's not. Maybe at a certain point, there's enough fan familiarity with this stuff built up that people are going to pitch a fit if you contradict something they've all taken for granted. This isn't. At this point, it no longer has anything remotely to do with the original question, but that's, I think, part of the enjoyment of things like Gundam: The Origin.
Yeah.
Yasuhiko is one of the few humans on Earth who actually has the level of creative cred where you can swagger out and go, "Oh yeah, you think that's how that happened? You're wrong. Here's how I see it." And you have to listen because it's like freaking Yasuhiko, man.
Yeah.
You better listen.
This is one of my highlights of my own manga collection is that entire hardback series, man. I love The Origin. It's so fantastic. But no, if anything, thank you for answering that question as best as you could, and thank you, Frank, for submitting that question. I have a really good one here from Gamble Chance. He writes, or they write, as an illustrator and a longtime fan of Gundam, if given the opportunity, which existing setting would you like to expand upon? What story would you want to tell?
Ooh, it's another one I'd never thought about. All the Gundam, which one would be fun to?
I guess you could start with your favorite your favorite universe, whether it's UC or an alternative one.
Yeah, it's tough to see much merit in mining anything additional out of the Universal Century because it's been so farmed over. I have an affection for that whole F91 era, but they've kind of gone back to that well so many times now with Crossbone Gundam that I suppose that's really played out as well.
Chris's favorite Gundam.
It's not obviously, but I also have a deep fondness for the Formula era. I love F90 silhouette Formula.
Yeah.
Even just the designs that they created that didn't make it into those manga. I just love that whole era and would love to see more with it that is not Crossbone related.
Yeah, those compact mobile suits are really cool. Like,
I'm my imagination is still captured, I think, by idea of a Double Zeta follow up. Where would that go? Like, what was being? If you look at First Gundam to Zeta to Double Zeta, go, where is this going? Where does the logic of this point you? And just pretend that nothing else ever happened. That could be an interesting thing to explore, especially if you say, and this is also the branch of the timeline where they kept Nagano on board.
Yeah.
This is where I think I could imagine doing something perhaps like G-Quux, where you go, this is a different branch. Okay, well, not to spoil. Wait, let me walk that back a little bit. I don't want to spoil anything people who haven't seen it yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I like this notion you can do stuff like Gundam the Origin or like Thunderbolt, where you're not constrained to shoehorn it into the existing continuity. So to the extent that those works are able to take First Gundam and go, let's put all the other stuff aside from now and just play with this. I love the idea of going from Double Zeta and trying to launch off in an opposite direction in which you don't feel any obligation whatsoever to pay attention to all the rest of the craft that's out there. That could have gone in a weird and interesting direction. I think that would be great fun to play with.
I agree with you because you're in a completely different region of space, over by Jupiter, right? So there really hasn't been much lore established for that, save for what I guess happens in Crossbone, and you can take that as you will. But I would love to see what happens to Judo and what was the girl that left with him? Damn it, I can't remember. Yeah, Ruluka. The two of them and what they would encounter there, because that's where Sirocco comes from. So to find out the politics of that region and what caused him to leave, and basically come to the Earth sphere would be interesting to find out in retrospect once Judo and Ruluka get there.
Came to gaslight women. That's what he came to do.
Oh shit!
That's
Mission
it. That's all he was there for.
Yes.
There's no women on Jupiter. He came to gaslight women and he accomplished that.
Boy, he was so good at it too.
But yeah, so I think more than to me, I guess the other various Gundam worlds, I guess in many cases, I'm not sure they feel solid enough to me that I'd be interested in exploring them as a world. I feel like they're more about the characters.
Yeah.
Gundam Seed, that set of characters, and then Wing is about those boys.
Yeah, it sure is.
No, I have one that was a big thing when we reviewed the show.
Mm-hmm.
Iron-Blooded Orphans and that damn Calamity War.
Yeah,
like,
the war took place before the show. Yeah, I would love to see that expanded upon.
Give me like maybe 13, maybe 26 episodes of that Calamity War, because I think of something that seems so like nothing, like you knew nothing about it, but the effects of it were so much that it's like, what the hell was going on in this thing? And the one little episode you get where you get the mobile armor that's kind of just going nuts, and you're like, oh wow, so there were like more of these things. Like, how the hell did humanity survive out of this junk? So That'd be an interesting one to me.
But I got one more thing.
Oh, fire away.
I cannot consider Gundam Seed as a world done until they address the flippin' space whales.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
What a loose thread.
Yeah,
25 years of waiting to hear about the damn space whales.
maybe that's the next movie, Chris. That might be the next movie. It's the George Glenn prequel whale fossil movie.
Putting that out there. If anybody else wants to make that their lifelong aspiration, good luck to you.
Exactly, man.
Mark, do you think that is like the most like the one thing that like had so much focus that never ever really resolved any of these Gundam shows? Because my God, in the first part of Seed, it's like the space whales everywhere. I mean, they're just sitting there pontificating out of it, and it's over the fireplace in Zaft, and it's like the space whale, and it's like nothing. What didn't?
They went to go hang out in Macross 7. That's what happened.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
It's well, you do get there's this kind of whales on the moon motif in Turn A, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think that idea kind of, in a weird way, gets brought up again in Gundam 00, just with the notion that you're trying to create this superior breed of humanity so that they can represent us in our first encounter with alien cultures. That's kind of, I think, the same idea behind the coordinators in Gundam Seed. That the reason why they fetishize this space whale fossil is the notion that this shows us that there's life out there. It's a bigger universe, and we need to upgrade ourselves in order to be prepared to engage with it.
Yeah.
So maybe conceptually that idea leads over into 00.
Yes.
Or it does get paid off.
I was thinking the same thing.
Or maybe it's the eventual crossover to Star Trek, because don't the we've seen in Star Trek that the whales,
the alien
rotation
probe,
ops,
yes.
they control the navigation, so maybe that's the eventual thing.
Even Star Wars has space whales with, I forget, the Purrgil and Star Wars Rebels and Ahsoka. They had their own version of space whales too, with their hyper jump and all that silly stuff. But
do you have anything on that, Mark? I mean, it sounds like you don't. Do you ever? Do you have any insight of like where that even came from, or why it just never was? Just like, was it just something they were trying to play and it just never took off? That's what I think it was. It was just something they thought was cool at the beginning of doing the show, and then as they do these things, it just goes in a different direction. So.
I could imagine that falling under the category of something that might actually be addressed in an interview someplace.
Yeah, maybe.
I've never looked into
Be
it.
back on Ganoda headlines or something. And as Yahtzee notes in the chat, we also never get an actual real explanation of what the seed mode is.
Yeah, like, true.
It's just a cool power up that certain people get to use, but it's like, but what exactly is it? Like, why does it do the things that it does? Who knows? It's just one of those things.
Fair point.
I'm pretty sure that's been mentioned someplace. I think one of the people who they seem to quiz about these sorts of like world building questions is actually, I think, was it Shigeru Morita from Studio Inoue, was the setting manager on that show. I have a couple of books where they really sit down and they grill him about the world building stuff from Gundam Seed, and I think he may have actually talked about the seed mode thing in one of those interviews. I'd have to go and look. That might actually be addressed someplace.
Okay, interesting.
Well, as a satisfying what were they thinking kind of thing.
Yeah. Speaking of production materials, I think you mentioned on an episode of Giant Robot FM that obviously you have this huge library of books you've collected over the decades, but that a lot of books that you had initially collected to get the Mecha data, and now you're diving into them for production information. And of course, on Ultimate Mark, you've got this wealth of material about Gundam production histories for the UC series, and now this deep dive into Sunrise's history. So in the course of all of this research in the last few years, what's like the most interesting tidbit or piece of information that you've come across that maybe you weren't aware of or didn't know maybe the whole story of?
I think in general, and I'm gonna go over this part while I kind of buy time to think of any other like specific juicy tidbits. But getting a sense of how Sunrise created things, who even is or was Sunrise, as distinct from the creators they bring in, and kind of in particular understanding the existence and the role of the planning office, Sunrise, and the importance of that organization and the people in it in just coming up with the ideas for all these shows. Most of these Sunrise works, at least up through at least the year 2000, there's pretty good documentation about how the ideas came about. And most of the time, it was the people in the planning office who would develop these pitches and kind of line up sponsors. Then once the sponsors on board and the production's the go-ahead, then they bring in a director and hand the thing over to them. So you have this kind of thing where, on the one hand, the director is often not involved in generating the original idea. But once the production is approved, they have a tremendous amount of creative control over its development from there. So you have this combination of, sometimes you have things like, say, Ideon or Dagram or whatever, or Lasner, which just get dropped in a director's lap. And then they kind of run with it and shape it according to their own lights. But I think just reading interviews with the people like Eiji Yamaura, the original head of the planning office, and people like Koichi Inoue and Yoshie Kawahara, who worked closely with him, developing ideas for shows. It's really interesting because you find out where these things come from and what they were thinking. And there are answers to this. These aren't things that a single genius creator. These often aren't things that Tomino or Ryosuke Takahashi or whoever just came up with. Like they wake up in the middle of the night and go, I have an idea for a robot show. But at the same time, they weren't spontaneously generated like worms from decaying flesh by corporate magic. Individual human beings smoked a lot of cigarettes and hung out in a lot of bars and scratched their heads a lot and came up with these things and then pitched them to a company and made them happen. And to see the sweaty human side of the creation of these ideas is super cool to learn about. I think as somebody who on and off has aspired to be a collaborator on creative works or to develop my own things, I think ultimately it's inspiring to hear about the human side of story creation. That these things aren't produced by the lumbering making operations of corporate monoliths. Humans create stories, companies never do. And it's cool to have the particulars of that and have people speaking on the record quite frankly and humorously about how these things came about. And I think quite often these stories are very funny. A lot of them obviously involving Tomino. He's a pretty good anecdote generator. So I think there are specific stories that are quite vivid. I've been filibustering for a minute to see if I can just pull any of those up, but at the moment they're all just blurring into a sea of Katsushi Murakami being mean to people. It's they just
Make a great point though, because we talk so often about particular directors, whether it's someone in live action like Christopher Nolan or an anime like you mentioned Takahashi, Tomino, etc. And this sort of like auteur idea of ascribing so much to one person's vision when in reality we all know that these are the works of hundreds of people coming together, and that it takes a lot of people to put out these things that we enjoy, and so many of them don't get the credit that they deserve, and there's so many things that have to come together to make things work, and you never know the one idea some minor person has that made a difference or not. It's not always just the vision of the director. So I think it's good to dive in with these histories that you've been posting and kind of, see that human element. I love the anecdote about the the Sunrise guy who would come into one of the studios and just hang out on their couch that the animators used to sleep on, and that they'd get mad at him for sitting on their couch. That's such a wonderfully human story that just has like that gives like character to these people and gives them more substance than just a name on a screen or on a website listing.
Yeah, and I think now that I've had a minute to kind of digest that, that's from Yoshie Kawahara's reminiscences about working at Sunrise. And I think one of the things that was really striking to me as I went through those, her columns that she's been doing for Great Mechanics are in chronological order, basically. So she spent the last, more than a dozen years now, just writing a memoir in quarterly column form for Great Mechanics about my life at Sunrise. And it's just full of these sorts of great character sketches. But I think one of the things that really came through to me, initially from Kawahara's write-ups, was the importance of Tadao Nagahama, the director. He was the guy who took over Raideen after Tomino was fired.
Oh,
The whole Raideen thing is astonishing. Tell you what. As a pretext to talk about Nagahama, let me just ramble about Raideen for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the first Sunrise robot show. They kind of put it together. They brought on Tomino to direct it. This was the point at which Yasuhiko, who had been working on the development of Raideen before Tomino showed up, he and Tomino had crossed paths before in the whole storyboarding racket, and had the impression that Tomino was just this kind of flake who'd kind of come in, he'd jam out a bunch of absolutely unanimatable storyboards full of like incidental characters wandering around, like, and then turn them in the next day and vanish and leave everybody else to sort out the mess he'd made. So he had this impression of Tomino as a bit of a flake, and his head was full of like artsy film school ideas that couldn't be translated into animation. But they had gone through and animated basically the first 4 episodes of Raideen or so before they had a TV station lined up. And when they finally landed one, the TV station producer was like, this won't do. This is utterly unsuitable for our audience. This is a time slot for little kids. And this is full of occult symbology and ESP and alien civilizations. And no, that's against our broadcast standards. We have to change the entire show. And they kind of pivoted. They changed the format of the show. They went from like these continuing story arcs to standalone episodes. They tried really hard to kind of retool it in the way that the TV station wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially the TV station was so unhappy they needed a scapegoat, and they picked Tomino. They fired him halfway through the show. Which was something I think Sunrise felt really bad about. Part of the reason they turned to him later on to do like Zambot and Daitan, they felt they owed him basically, because he'd taken the fall on Raideen. But anyway, they brought in Tadao Nagahama, who was a kind of hot guy at that point. He'd done like Star of the Giants and all these other things, and this guy's a solid performer. Everybody loves Nagahama. We're in good hands with him. And Tomino came back working under Nagahama as an episode director and storyboard guy, and stayed with Nagahama's team as they went on to Combattler V and Voltus 5. And everyone, remotely associated with those shows was astonished. Like the notion that rather than just storming off and throwing a fit and going, "I'll never work with you guys again, how dare you," Tomino came back and like worked under the guy who they'd replaced him with, and we could learn all of his tricks. Mm-hmm. I think that was the thing which, more than anything else, gave everyone in that field, including Yasuhiko, vast respect for Tomino with his willingness to swallow his own ego and humble himself and apply himself to learning from this guy who had replaced him. That was, I think, a lot of the regard that people in the industry have for Tomino came from the way he handled that. And then at the same time, this brings in Nagahama, who is, I think, a really important figure in basically making anime fandom what it is today. He was, I think, the first person in the industry who welcomed fans, high school fans. Everybody else thought they were freaks. They were making shows for little kids. And these these high school girls and boys would come up and knock on the door of the studio and say, "Can we look around? Can we see what you're doing?" They didn't know what to do with it. They're like, "Deviants? They're like, why are you watching this show we're making for preschoolers? Yuck! I'd rather I didn't know you existed." And Nagahama welcomed them. He thought it was great. He brought them on, brought a lot of people into the industry from fandom. He was the person who discovered Yutaka Izubuchi, who would basically send in fan drawings. He's like, "Yeah, come, great, yeah, send me some stuff. We'll use it in the show." He opened the doors to fandom in a way that other people later imitated. They did because they were imitating Nagahama. And at the same time, like all these other guys, Nagahama was a real character. I think the thing that he seems to be, one of the things he's most remembered for is his background was in doing puppet theater.
Oh.
So he loved doing funny voices, and he was known as the one-man dubbing studio because when they were putting together the rough cuts of each episode of a show, he would sit there in the office and record his own voice track as a placeholder, doing all the voices of all the characters.
Nice.
And everyone just listen to him do this and perform entire episodes single-handedly in character, doing all the voices. I thought it was absolutely the most amazing thing.
That is phenomenal. he had a clear vision for how each episode would play out, and even the tonal and vocal inflections of the characters too. I guess it is as a guideline for when they actually had the actors come in and record as well. So that's fantastic. And to actually let total strangers into the studio is also a cool thing. Kids who are just in the area, letting them in. That's something they probably wouldn't do now, but back then, were the all or nothing days.
Oh yeah, and he died pretty early. I think in 1981. Yeah, I think he left at the beginning of with it Daltanius, and went to go direct with it Rose of Versailles. They were doing an anime of that, which was his dream project. I think he died right after that.
Man.
So he wasn't around to see where the stuff developed, but I think, in all seriousness, putting aside all the cute anecdotes, I don't think things would have developed the way they did without him.
Yeah.
So, a moment.
Very influential. I wonder if from that class of from the people who worked at the studio at the time, and then later some of the fans that were in college at the time that these shows were coming out in the late 70s, if they were some of the kids that visited the studio, like Shoji Kawamori, and because I know there was a group of hotshot newbies in the business at the turn of the decade that ended up making great anime, including Macross and whatnot, that were influenced by those guys.
There's a whole kind of primordial connection between Sunrise and Studio Nue, where basically they recruited those guys to advise on their shows. There's this whole anecdote about how, oh man, we've got roped into doing all these sci-fi shows, and we're middle managers from Mushi Production. We don't know anything about sci-fi. We hear there are these kids who do this fanzine, and they're massive nerds. So they basically said, hey, if you want to come and meet with us at this local coffee shop, we're buying. And so, Nue brought, Crystal Art Studio it was then, but they brought 40 people. They brought all their friends. Hey, this corporate guy is buying us all cake and coffee. Bring everyone. They just took over the entire restaurant. They're all just sitting around there stuffing their faces with cake.
It'd be cool to see a documentary on someday. I'm sure it's probably been done in Japan, but someone over here would do it. That would be awesome. But those are the frontier times. But Chris, did you have any other questions? I have 3 quick ones, and then I'm done basically.
I would say I'm curious. Having consumed all the Gundam that there is over the years, over the decades, what do you think, in your opinion, is the most underrated Gundam series? And I suspect I know what your answer is, but I'm curious to see if you'll surprise me.
Here we go.
Underrated.
Underrated. so many of them are getting reevaluated now. It's like, there's been a Double Zeta renaissance. There's been a kind of a grudging reevaluation of V Gundam. Even G Savior has had its turn in the sun. So I think in terms, we really got to think about what are the shows which people just haven't yet taken another look at. I suppose maybe one of them might be 8's Mobile Suit Team. I feel like its reputation isn't high compared to what it could be. I look forward to at some point in the future getting to delve into the production of that because there's some interesting stories there.
Absolutely.
And otherwise, I think I have a lot of. I wouldn't say Build Fighters is underrated though. I feel like that got a fair shake. Everyone knows it's good fun.
Yeah, I think it did too.
I think I have to go with 8 Multi Team maybe. Only one where I feel like the evaluation seems to be a little lower than it's warranted.
I thought you were going to say D Gundam.
I love Gundam. I love it. I mean, I love Charlotte's Counterattack. I love V Gundam. The more Tomino, the better. I realize and accept that not everybody's going to arrive at that same feeling, but as long as they're watching it, I'm happy. If people want to watch V Gundam and go, well, that was weird and I didn't really like it, fair dues.
I will say for the record that I do not approve of and will not stand for any reevaluations of G Savior. That is a bridge too far for me. I'm not down with that.
What about G?
That's the hill you're dying on.
What about G Reco?
G Reco has its merits, and I will not begrudge anyone for enjoying different aspects of G Reco. It's a show that I've described as great in every respect except for the story, and that's kind of my view.
I think the most underrated Gundam series to this day still, because it's in the shadow of two really incredible ones, and it's coming up on its 30th anniversary, is After War Gundam X. I think that series got cut short, unfortunately, before it had the chance to really flourish, but I think what we got in the show was pretty good. And I know that there's a manga follow-up, which I have not read yet, which I need to get into, but
not great.
It's not that. Yeah.
Yeah.
it's okay.
Oh, well, damn. But the show itself, I thought, was a great kind of like off the beaten path Gundam series.
Well, I feel like that one. That's another one. I'd like to see that war, the space war. I mean, if you're going to have an offshoot, I'd like to see the space war, and you could do it because you got Gundams.
I think we know that that's pretty much just the 1 year war with a bajillion more colonies, and
pretty much.
See that difference.
Yeah, probably in the end. Yeah, you're right.
How many other Gundam worlds have a kind of have some kind of catastrophic war in the backstory? I think in G Gundam you've got a chaos war.
Mm-hmm. Oh
yeah. You have a collapse war. There's always not always. There's often, in many cases, in at least one case, there's a big war in the past, and it kind of I think just serves as a placeholder for all that kind of Gundam, the era of the space wars.
Yeah.
Well, it follows the narrative that's when does technology advance the most for humans is during times of large wars or global wars. I mean, look at what happened in the World War II, how quickly we went from not being able to have a lot of planes to just mass amounts of planes, radar, all these things. And I think that's always the great way in the storytelling of sitting there saying, okay, it was kind of like the world we're in, but then these things happen, and the great equalizer is the mobile suit. So,
with Gundam X, and I think this is the thing about the intentions of that intrigue me, I think, more than anything else about the show itself, is Gundam X is less a reaction. In the story, there's a notion that they're dealing with the consequences of a catastrophic conflict, and I think it's pretty. It's clear that in some sense, in the real world, this is a reaction to the impact of the original Gundam, more so than the previous. Than Gundam and Gundam Wing. It's the one which feels most like an act of homage. But that notion that that the director Takamatsu mentioned several times in interviews, that it's less of a for him, he's reacting less to the idea of First Gundam than to that moment when the movies came out and you had that New Century Declaration. The sense that watching, that being like a young person watching kind of subversive anime made you part of some kind of social vanguard where you're going to transform the way people thought about the world, and that it didn't happen. That there's this kind of meta interpretation of Gundam X where it's about buying into this myth that you're part of a new type of person who's going to not repeat the mistakes of the past, and then you do, and you're not any better, and the world just keeps on keeping on.
Well,
And
it's
that's deep. I like that. I like that aspect of it.
I actually find the other thing that I find interesting about Gundam X is, you always hear about Tamino. He was a child in the aftermath of World War II, and that impacted a lot of what he did. But it seems like the Gundam X probably shows what his life kind of would have been like living in that world as a child, more than even like First Gundam. First Gundam kind of deals with more of the conflict itself, and that Gundam X deals with the aftermath, how people have to survive in those things. So I always found that kind of interesting.
I think that sort of thing is probably on people's minds again, with Godzilla -1.
Oh, yes.
Like that post-war, right, crawling out of the ashes kind of thing. I think for the people of, not even Tomino's generation, I think a little older, Tomino was just a little too young to really have conscious memories of that.
Yeah.
I would probably, let's say he had memories of post-war era as a child, but not of being a child during wartime. But I think now it's an actual effort of imagination for people who grew up, who were born after the war, to try and reconstruct that experience, and to try and, I think, by doing that, try and understand what their parents and grandparents went through. It almost feels like an effort for them in evoking that era to try and connect with the experiences of their elders.
Yeah. Well, I've always told these guys, you have all these World War II movies where they show the battles and all this other stuff. I've always wanted to see something where it's the immediate aftermath. You have these giant armies just in these countries, and, the devastation and having to deal with like all kind of the things that are going on. The decisions being made by people that, really, basically set us on course for the next like couple of decades. So yeah, it is an interesting take. So
Deep. All right, what else you got?
All right, 2 quick questions from you. Also, thank you to Gamble Chance for their earlier submission. But on to Yazi, one of our longtime listeners and contributors to the show. The first question he asks is, weren't the Zakus originally called the Zoks?
Really?
Yeah.
I think that was something where when they first did an English language release of the Gundam novels, I think Fred Schott, who was doing the translation on that, the first pass, he came up with his own romanization of things.
Yeah.
For various reasons, there wasn't a really established set of spellings for use on the English language side at that point. I think to some extent he wanted to try and capture some of the feel of how it sounded in Japanese, and he's also, good friends with Tomino, so some of this, I'm sure, reflected, kind of his sense of how, of how Tomino would have envisioned this. But I would just put that in the category of at that point, there wasn't a style guide.
Right.
He did eventually make one, I think, in 1999, in anticipation of First Gundam coming out in the West, and they actually they put together on the Japan side an official spelling list for First Gundam. And from that point on, not everything was locked. But up until then, I mean, you spell Shar with a C or with an S? Is it Zaku or Zak? Is it Principality or Duchy or Archduchy of Zeon or Zion or Geon or Gaon or whatever? Yeah.
Amuro Ray, REI, all that kind of stuff. And way dating myself, of course, here, but way back in the day when I took over the Mecha domain and incorporated it into MAHQ, one of the first things I did was, to update all of the terminology and the spellings to this official list, and I never got so many angry emails.
Ooh.
People complaining about how that was wrong, and that a principality has a prince and there's no prince in Xeon, and why are you using these names? And it's like, man, people really do latch on to terminology of things and get mad if you change something. And it's like, look, guys, I didn't come up with this stuff. I'm just using what Sunrise has done. Go be mad at them. I'm not the guy.
Don't drop
Just the messenger.
Yep. We could easily spend, I'm sure, an entire show just like jawboning about the weird translation choices. But we're out of time. Too bad.
Speaking of which, the other question Yazi asks, this is probably the most important question of the night. Brace yourself. Here we go. What killed the Doozy Bots project?
I don't know.
We're trying to learn. We're still trying to figure out the JFK assassination, and he's asking what happened to Doozy Bots. Oh my god! But
I don't know.
The world may never know.
I have never in my life devoted a split second to researching Doozy Bots.
Nor should anybody.
Good luck to them. The entire cottage industry of Doozy Bots investigators. More power to them. May you be fruitful in your efforts.
Robert Stack will come back to life before we get answers. Unsolved mysteries. But thank you, Yazi, for your questions. Burjanin over on the Twitch chat said that they don't have any questions, but they wanted to just stop by real quick to thank you for your efforts, Mr. Simmons. Since finding the Gundam Project website long ago, I also appreciate your Mecha Talk forum posts. I remember 10 years ago chatting with Yazi and others in this community on a stream, and when 0080 and the MS era came up, I went to your forum post about 0080 and the MS era because your research was so very insightful. That's a specific memory I can recall pretty well. So thanks again, Mr. Simmons. That's what Burjana writes. Thank you, Burjana.
Well, thank you. Honestly, it's nice that I've been able to, to be to give value to all these people in this weird little niche shared interest. It's life has given the opportunity to give a little something to people, and thank you for receiving it and enjoying it. Enough for more.
Absolutely. I've got one last question, but I'll let Neo go ahead and ask it.
Well, actually, no, go ahead, because I think mine's better as a closing question.
Oh, gotcha.
So just go ahead.
Here we go. This is also from MCT Dread. Thank you very much, by the way, for submitting this question. They write, if you could have an interview with any mangaka, mecha designer, or anime director, living or dead, who would you choose?
I think the dead ones would be fairly short. I mean, I'm not a good interviewer, to be perfectly honest. I've interviewed. I've had the privilege, the opportunity to interview Tomino a few times.
Nice.
And I've come to recognize that I suck at it.
Oh wow.
I'm not the person who's going to come up with like a good line of conversation, get good information out of him. So I'm thinking about this less as like, it'd be really valuable for me to log this for my book of interviews. But I might think about it more as like, who would I be personally tickled to talk to? And in that sense, it's wow. After all that preamble, I honestly, I'm not sure. I would love at some point, I think, to just have a chat with Yoshie Kawahara, because I've gotten so much out of reading her columns.
Oh, nice.
and her reminiscences about all these people and kind of being embedded in Sunrise. I think that would be a lot of fun. And I think it's tough when you're talking to somebody you really admire, because you becomes less about what do I want to get out of this conversation and more how can I avoid them realizing what an idiot I am.
Oh.
For me, the flop sweat just overwhelms the rest of the experience. You're just preoccupied with not having to think you're an imbecile, which of course guarantees that outcome. Oh, that's a tough one.
No, it's understandable. Just mine real quick is Satoshi Kon. I would have loved to talk to him. I'm a big fan of his movies, and we lost him too soon. And he never got to finish that last project he was working on. So that primarily would be what I would talk to him about. Is the project he was working on before he passed away. So that's mine.
Leiji Matsumoto.
Oh, hell yeah. A legend.
But
and go ahead. Sorry.
No, any other questions? Because I just want to give
good.
one.
I am good. Go for it.
I'm good to close this out with your last question.
Take us
So
home,
this,
Neil.
I think this is a good closing question, and I don't want you to think too hard on it, Mark, and no pressure on this one. But
I've been thinking
if you what do you want the future of Gundam to be? Like, what is there something that you would want to see if you were in control of Sunrise for a day? What route would you want to do? What exploration? I know we mentioned like side stories and things, but is there something that you want to see that the franchise hasn't done, or you'd like to see them go in that direction?
These are all such good questions. We're reaching the point now where inevitably, because of the way time works, one day Gundam will have outlived all of its creators. It will have outlived me. It will have outlived all of us. It will go on and on and on in the way that things do once they become franchises or IP. So I'm not concerned about health of Gundam. I'm sure that it will continue to exist as a vessel for different people to express themselves, and I hope they express interesting and worthwhile things. I would love to see at some point a Gundam without Gundams. All those things which, when we pay lip service to the idea of Gundam, we say, well, it's about kind of human potential and expansion into space, and how can we become an interplanetary civilization without losing our connection to the precious ecology of Earth, which gave birth to all of us, and what are the limits of human capacity? Will we ever overcome this and that? And can the young really change things up, or are they just going to get ground up by the systems old people create? All the things we say make it more than just a robot show.
Yeah,
I want to see a show that's just about that.
Nice.
And it doesn't also have robots in it, just to see what that would be like.
I'm with you on that. What was it? For the Barrel was a short story that I was getting into reading because of New Type magazine, and it kind of felt like that. Something that to me, the thing I would love to see is a political thriller set in the UC that doesn't necessarily focus on Gundams or any other mecha, but the impact that they've had on culture and the war, the effects of the wars and how they've affected things. Something that maybe deep in the Grips era or something like that, like with Kai Shiden's side manga that came out where he's investigating certain events of the Grips War. Something like that. I would love to see that. Just more of an adult story set in that universe. We'll never see it because you can't sell toys for that. But
yeah, I think the closest you could get on something like that would be maybe the Gundam, not a Gundam showing up for maybe the first couple of episodes. I think you'd have to go baby steps.
More than likely.
Yeah,
I'll throw something wacky out there on this subject. A controversial one with probably some fans. I would love to see a Gundam series that embraces even more than the Double O movie did
Hmm.
aliens.
Oh yeah.
Just
Yeah,
go
that's
all out,
something I would
go
think. Yeah.
fully interstellar. Give me Mass Effect, but through
Ooh,
Gundam.
nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
And
yeah,
so many
just
people will be mad.
I'm not mad at that. That's for sure. I would love to see it.
or yeah, or just maybe the classic alien invasion story, and the Gundams are, maybe that's the trump card.
That would shake up the formula for certain.
That's the game changer. It's like, yeah, that I was thinking about that when you were about to say that, but yeah, I think that would be, or a deep like space exploration type. I know people will say, well, there's ripping off Macross, but I mean, it's a way to shake it up. So
Everything rips off everything these days. It's
yeah, I mean,
always
everybody's, it's
also Macross has no like special claim to space exploration, so but that's it for me and my comments.
yeah, same
If
here.
you want to wrap us up, Neo.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark, for joining us. We know you're a busy guy, and we know it's been a long time. I think we should do this again, maybe in a lot sooner.
Yeah, before the end of the decade.
Yeah, before the end of the decade. That would be ideal. But thank you for your insight. Thank you for taking the time and dealing with our silliness and some of the questions there. And yeah, I mean, once again, thank you for. I will echo that listener SMS. Thank you for all the effort and time and just devotion you've done to something that a lot of people would say, why would you do this? Well, when you have a passion, and so thank you on that, and it's you should be applauded for that. So
Mark, where can we find you, by the way, online?
Yeah.
Where would you suggest people visit and catch up on you?
Okay, I guess at this point, I'm still posting stuff to that my ultimatemark.com/Gundam. That's where I'm putting all my various research projects. Right now, that's mostly ongoing, like Sunrise history stuff. So yeah, and I had something else for this. Oh, I actually did. What's the word? I grabbed the URL for GundamUnofficial.com. I haven't got around to setting it up.
Oh,
At some point, I can actually spin that up into its own website. I keep forgetting I have that. And so I've been squatting in that domain for a couple of years, so that could happen at some point. And I'm on Blue Sky, like various other people, at toysdream.bsky.social, whatever the default ending is. So yeah, I'm there, and if I do something new, I'll probably post it there. And if people want to bug me there, I'm buggable. I welcome your bugging. Say hi, cat, whatever. I'm on there a fair bit. It should be fairly reachable. And just in general, hey, it's been great fun being on here. It's been lovely chatting with all of you, and I want to thank everybody out there listening for inviting me into your homes and your ears and letting me blather on for a couple of hours of your precious life. I hope one day you'll get that time back, but in the meantime, thank you for giving.
I'm sure they're all. Yeah, exactly.
absolutely.
So, well, thank you again. Chris, anything on the MHQ front before we get out of here?
Only to say that we're seeking some new contributors, and if you go to mhq.net, as of the time that we're doing this live stream, it's the second post down. It's pretty self-explanatory, and you click on it. We're looking for some people who might want to help us out with reviewing some mecha anime, because I can't do it all by myself. And if you have any interest in that, and with the specific things I'm looking for, then shoot me an email.
How's the pay? Is it you kind of like
What?
Like the Daily Bugle.
Money? You want money? Give me pictures of Spider-Man.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. All right, Soul Bro, can you let everybody know where they can find us?
Yeah, I'll just keep it short and sweet. MAHQ.net. That's the Mecha and Anime headquarters. Make sure to go there, visit. You can find links to the podcast there, the live stream. Props to everybody who came out tonight and contributed to the conversation. Thank you for submitting questions. Everybody who just tuned in to watch on Twitch and youtube.com/Gundam MAHQ. You guys are the best. And other than that, that's all I've got.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you once again, Mark, for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. And this has been episode 308 of Gundam. We'll be back in a few weeks with episode 309. Thank you.